Good afternoon and welcome to today's PSA and BISA Teaching and Learning webinar. Today we've got Stephen Thornton from University of Cardiff with us, and Stephen will be speaking about information literacy and the challenges of promoting student information literacy in our new online world in which we are. Stephen is a reader in politics at the University of Cardiff, and he's an expert on British political history, having written books on topics such as the architectural history of Whitehall. In terms of housekeeping, a few housekeeping points. Please do keep your microphone turned off during the duration of the seminar. That gives a better sound quality for everybody. We are recording it, so if you don't want your image to appear, please do click your camera off. And finally, if you have questions, please post them in the chat channel. And then once Stephen's finished his talk, I will put those together and send those through to Stephen. So without further ado, over to Stephen. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, John. And good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. But it's August. Shouldn't you all be on holiday? Anyway, now we're in a kind of post-BAFTA mode. I'd like to start off by thanking a few people. Donna, of course, and John for the invite. Also, Jamie Roberts, Lally Sindel, and John Pollock for getting me to this stage that I can speak to you all. And also Isabella Ross-and-Dee from the BISA team as well. In addition, I drew on the expertise and indeed patience of many others in putting this paper together. In particular, 3 actual information professionals. I would not call myself that. These are Rebecca Mogg, Louisa Tramontini and Ruth Thornton from Cardiff Libraries. I'm delighted and relieved to see that 1 or 2 of you are here today. So I'm hoping you might be able to help me out later. Also, hopefully, Dr. Doug Atkinson, who like me is from the Department of Politics and IR at Cardiff, and with whom I've recently been collaborating and doing some interesting research that links information behaviours to the actual grades that students achieve. So in future, it may be that we don't have to read the whole essays to calculate a thoughtful mark. We just need to analyse the bibliography. I'm only kidding. On that note, largely because I'm not overly confident of either my online connection or my general competence, I'm keeping this session as simple as possible. So none of you fancy mentor-meter shenanigans here today. So I'm doing the traditional, and you have a tradition after 3 months? I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm going to do the usual spouting for 30 minutes or so with slides, and then awaiting your responses and your chat. And finally, for this introduction, I guess I ought to do some apologies. I had hoped by the start of August that it would have been possible to fix my smile. But alas, I'm still missing one of my front teeth, a circumstance that provides me both with something of a lisp and, according to one friend, the rakish air of a Victorian pornographer. And on that note, to the presentation, hopefully, if I can share the screen. Hooray! I hope that's worked. I can see it anyway.
Yeah, that's fine, Stephen. We can see that.
Thank you. I'm relieved to hear a response. In the midst of our frantic changes to a mostly online teaching environment, one aspect that has been occasionally overlooked has been the fate of our university libraries. Though library staff have been working harder than ever, library buildings, of course, have been closed. Physical collections have been frozen. Now, in some places, there has been some thawing in recent days and weeks with the introduction of a click and collect service, whereby books can be ordered and picked up. But this is quite a distance away from full access. Now, obviously, we don't know what the situation will be like at the start of the next semester. But as recent events from Manchester to Melbourne suggest, It's safe to assume that the library service won't be returning to the status quo ante for a little while yet. And even if, by some flash of good fortune, libraries do get back to something like normal, there remains the likelihood that a fair proportion of our students, and indeed staff, won't be in a position to just pop in and browse the library bookshelves. So does this matter at all for us folk currently trying to wrangle politics modules designed for a pre-COVID world into ones that work for our current predicament? Well, yeah, I think it does. And that inevitably is what this presentation is largely about. However, this talk isn't just about our response to this particular crisis. And what seems to be the theme of many PSA, BISA webinars, this up to now at least, excellent series, COVID-19 has proved a catalyst to consider a wide array of innovative pedagogic activity that's been going on for quite a while now, but mostly in the shadows. In terms of university teaching and learning at least, the pandemic has shone a piercing searchlight that has dazzled, but once our eyes have readjusted, hopefully we will have a clearer view ahead of basically what we should have been doing for some time now. Right, let's see if I can. Hey, moved on a slide. So, here are the areas on which I wish to spout forth. And of course, as I'm merrily pontificating, do use that chat function to record questions, queries and thoughts that I may or may not be able to respond to sensibly later. Quite a bit of this will inevitably involve looking back, because although COVID-19 has introduced a particular urgency to proceedings, as I've kind of suggested already, many of the stress points were already in existence. For example, the trend for many academic libraries to move towards an increasingly digital service began well before this year. But the implications of this have rarely been considered by those outside the library world. Similarly, fears that society at large, and politics students in particular, have struggled to make sense of an increasingly rowdy information environment have been expressed for years, decades even. Though of course the COVID situation has certainly raised the profile of fake news and the various associated conspiracy theories, this is nothing new. And so, although of course I will cover some of the specific implications for the current situation, it is worth emphasising again that most of the issues would need to be addressed at some point, with or without a global pandemic breathing down our necks. Aha, yes. This is a picture of a library. It's a Singleton Library at Swansea University, to be precise. In full swing just a year or two ago. Isn't it amazing how a site that was once so normal looks now so strange, so dangerous even? Where are those masks? Where's the sanitizer? The pastors of home country, they do things differently there, of course. Now, another thought this image provokes is that libraries are so much more than simple repositories of books. They are amongst the most important learning spaces that a university possesses. And that's another crucial matter to be considered in this changed learning environment. However, the main purpose of this image is to help us to make the mental leap back in time to 3 BC, that is 2017, 3 years before COVID. So to set the scene, in 2017, like most years, I put out a survey to gauge the information behaviours of students who had just started their politics, IR degrees at Cardiff University. The class subjected to this were a group of eager freshers in the first week of studying a foundational module on comparative politics, a familiar staple of many politics degrees up and down the land. Now, the point was to examine the responses to a number of questions designed to tease out students' relationships with information. For example, asking the students what types of resources they favoured, what checks they used to analyse whether the information being used was reliable, that kind of stuff. I compared those results with a similar survey from 2009. I've been doing it that long, to see what, if anything, had changed. With information literacy as a concept having become more widely known in recent years, along with changes to the information landscape, notably through the expansion of social media. Now, I had expected students coming to university in 2017 to show perhaps a little bit more evidence of being information savvy than those who came through our doors, often enthusiastically coughing fresh as flu over the lecture theatre furniture back in 2009. There were, however, few findings to back up this hunch. The table you see before you shows a relatively similar picture across time, across the near decade. Oh, just to add, amazingly, I had 110 responses both times. That'll never happen again. But as you can see, in terms of books, websites, journal articles, the top three, the numbers have stayed pretty stable. Slightly fewer doing websites in 2009, but that's it. Perhaps most striking, incredibly, the use of ebooks. This is, as I say, these are students just coming into university. But until that point, not all that many had used ebooks. This was the case in 2009, but even more the case, incredibly, in 17. I had an extra question in 17 as well about social media. And again, 29 students out of 110. So, interesting. The information world may have opened up a lot, but it seems, as Alison Head has observed, that a common response for many students, both at school and at college, is to seek refuge in a narrow band of tried and true resources. This second table, that's kind of a more sophisticated question about the strategies that students use to assess whether, in this case, a website is worthy enough for them to use in an academic essay. And again, the similarities are much stronger than the differences across time. It was a case in 2009 that only a relatively small minority of students possess what could be described as a coherent web evaluation strategy. And that's just the same again in 2017. And just for completeness, here are the final results. RefMe there was a popular citation management tool of the time. It's been gone now, it's been replaced by Cite This For Me. But it's not a quality control device. If anyone is interested in this and other questions such as what do you understand by the word plagiarism, just head on down to this article that you see on the slide. That, of course, if it's available through the university library, of course. Right. Moving on. Now the surveys that you've just seen did provide a strong hint that students are not coming to university any better equipped at navigating a safe path through the minefield of digital information than any previous generation. And I would add that this is not for want of trying in many schools and public libraries. But as soon as there is any squeeze on resources, it's the library services that tend to take the first hit. So these survey results did show something of interest, but I did want a clearer picture of the information behaviours of my students, an idea of how they actually use their information skills as part of their everyday academic work. Now, this brought me to citation analysis. It's a research method used initially for library collection management purposes, but increasingly has been used to assess students' information literacy proficiency. And basically, involves trawling through students' references and bibliographies to see if anything interesting turns up. I did this first in 2018 with a gentle pilot study. And this involved taking a random sample of scripts and seeing how many sources we used and breaking these down further into various different types, checking whether the sources were on the official reading list and throwing the marks in for good measure. These results are from the same class as before, and the essays analysed were amongst the first that they had written at university. And what you see before you are the results of the first 10 random essays. So what do they suggest? Well, perhaps that the effort of putting together reading lists is not always fully rewarded. Websites, it would seem, are the most popular form of resource on this module. And there does seem to be some kind of correlation between use of particular types of resources and grades. And I'll come back to that. If you spot anything else, as ever, please shove it in the chat. I'm turning into Alan Partridge. Not good. This second table here analyses the referencing. As I say, the students wrote this essay early, before there had been much information literacy training, but there had been some. And this was, as usual, fairly sparsely attended. Now, though just one element, it does seem to support Shannon and Shannon's contention. Many first years don't see these types of information skills as important. Or rather, at this stage, perhaps they don't know what they don't know, and so think they can wing it. And this also applies to more sophisticated skills too, such as evaluating the authority of information. And if anything, 15 or so years of doing this kind of stuff has taught me, it is that labelling something as study skills just doesn't work. You know, I think I've realised now just how staged hypnotists do their magic. They just whisper the phrase study skills, and the subject is already halfway into a trance. The spell research methods has a similar effect. And finally, on this bit of citation analysis stuff, a bit of a teaser for forthcoming attractions, as they say. My colleague Doug Atkinson, who is a data wizard of the highest order, has painstakingly created a data set of 262 students from the same class again, this last year actually, and has used the different types of information sources variables to demonstrate to a high degree of probability that using some types of information provide a particularly positive steps towards the recognition of academic merit in students' works. If they use particular types of resources, they're likely to get a higher mark. And equally, some are less effective. If anyone's interested, I could talk to you more about this in the chat, and we are currently looking for a suitable journal for our research. So any suggestions, gratefully received. Right, so moving on to the present day. As suggested already, it's often tricky enough getting our students ready to face a world of information uncertainty. But this coming year, we face various additional hurdles, though it may be we can turn some of these into something positive. Now, there are no doubt more challenges than the ones you see before you, ones I've not considered, those unknown unknowns again. But I've listed those on the screen as they broadly follow on from guidance circulated by Cardiff University Libraries. And I've seen similar guidance online from other institutions. And it's all broadly in the same ballpark, though obviously all of it is contingent on what happens next. Going down the list, 1, 2, and 3 there, the first 3 scenarios are basically all aspects of the same theme, namely that there will be fewer resources than we're used to. The only resources sure to remain are those available digitally. So that's most journal articles and those ebooks. they're so popular. With obviously the extra mixed blessing of all the internet that has stuff that's on the internet. Now, of course, this all presupposes easy access at the student end to a suitably connected PC or whatever. And of course, there may also be issues with firewalls in certain states. So it's not a given. As I will return to in a minute or two, there is perhaps an expectation amongst some academics that e-books in particular will fill most of the gaps left on our reading list. This is not a safe assumption. Just because something is available on Kindle or on Amazon does not mean a library can access it on an institutional basis. Similarly, there's another myth, perhaps, that if an academic has a copy of a book or it's available in the library, they can just scan it and distribute it through BLE or whatever. And of course, that's not happening either because of very strict copyright restrictions. The usual CLA higher education license, as you all know, allows 10% of a work or one chapter, whichever is the greater. But that's not every book by any stretch. So inevitably, reading lists will have to be reduced. Now, this may not be a bad thing. Some reading lists on established courses are vast, unwieldy things that are off-putting to students, apparently, and could probably do with a good pruning in any case. Moving down the list, one further point is that library budgets will likely be restricted. Institutions are facing financial uncertainty. Library resources are always an easy target. And if there are any new titles, the chances are they will be restricted to digital only. This seems to be certainly the case in most of the university guidance I've read. And going digital only is, as we shall see, a pretty serious limitation, particularly on some modules. Right, yes. Now to return to the issue of e-books. As academics, we often don't realise how easy librarians make it for us. We put in our orders, and sometime later, the resource appears as if by magic. And of course, it's not magic. It's often the result of considerable detective work, false trails and hard bargaining with evil publishers. And sometimes librarians get thanked, but not always. The move to e-books, which has been going on for quite a while, can make this process even more difficult. And this shall be illustrated through the medium of penguins. The images you see before you are courtesy of Peter Barr, Head of Content and Collections at the University of Sheffield. And they were doing the rounds on Twitter a few weeks back. Hence, they're not quite as clear as they could be. They do give a lovely picture of some of the issues. So I'll let you enjoy these for a little while. There's 4 of them. It gives you an idea of what librarians have to go through as soon as we said, we want this book. It's not that easy. Does it exist? The license issue. We'll come to that in a second. That's a tricky one. Is it too expensive? Yeah, that's another important issue. Academics as penguins. Brilliant. Right, so without the aid of penguins this time, here are some of those main issues. I say, just to get you into the mindset of what it's like to be a librarian at this time. And here's some of the reasons why an e-book might not be available. It's the book is an interesting one. Inevitably, the older it is, the less likely it is that it's been digitized. If it's in copyright to turn a book into an ebook actually requires a written agreement of the author, who's not always willing or indeed aware. Time to check those old contracts, people. Licensing rights. This is a biggie. Now, is the book single use only? Now, if so, it's likely to be cheaper. Indeed, it's more likely to be available in the first case. But that's not great if you've got a class of, say, 300 students all keen to use a set deadline for the test, or indeed to use it in an open book exam. There have already been issues about that. And finally, the publishers. Yes, the publishers, we are ever more dependent on the whims, the profit margins of publishers. To give you some idea of this, here's a snippet from an interview with academic librarian Johanna Harris. And she has some very sharp words to say about publishers. You can see before you, there are, many of them at least, have been hiking up the cost of ebooks because they are aware that universities are increasingly using ebooks. She also goes on to say that although, quite a few publishers have been making some noise during lockdown about upgrading single-use licenses to unlimited user licenses. She adds, these are actually time limited, you know. And some of them you could see effectively as a ruse to make more money in the long run. They're not charities, you know, which is fair enough, I suppose. So, and with a module design in mind, of course, what will be the result of this, those limitations on those carefully crafted reading lists? Well, it depends very much on your module. If the books you rely upon are largely fairly modern, 21st century, mostly academic, textbooks and the like, then you might get off pretty lightly. But if you happen to run a module that has a historical bent, such as a random example, a master's course on Thatcher and Thatcherism, and one that particularly involves a lot of non-academic books, such as memoirs and so forth, you could be in trouble. And here's a natural example. This is, as you probably guess, part of the reading list on one of my modules. And it's one that Louisa, the wonderful politics subject librarian, has kindly marked up for me in terms of availability, or in this case, largely non-availability. I'm a worried man. Now, obviously, there are alternative resources out there, and many library systems have adapted by trying to replicate certain features of a physical library, like this virtual browse feature here. And this helps, but it's still going to be quite a task to replace or find alternatives for a lot of certainly what I'm going to try and teach next year. So the main story is, inevitably, don't leave it too late. Right. So what can we do in this circumstance, in this situation? I don't think, spell this out too much, because I think once most folks are aware of the issue, it's fairly obvious most of the things that can be done to make the best of the situation. But it's worth spelling a few out. Most important, it's best to start talking to our most important information resources right now, and that's of course the librarians. And this isn't just about resources, it's broader than that. David Gubler put it back in 2018, start by talking to the experts. Librarians on your campus have been thinking about these issues, mostly to do with information literacy, for a long time. and many now regularly collaborate with faculty members to teach research skills to students. Reach out to librarians before semester starts. Talk about your course goals and ask for suggestions how to integrate information literacy into your teaching and assignments. So yeah, make that step. Do start talking to our librarians. And as I say, not just to get those resources, but also to help teach, to make our students more information savvy, because they'll need to be. What else? And yeah, be realistic. Don't simply assume that the students will have the resource access that they had not all that long ago. Point out those alternatives, as few students, and indeed not all staff, are fully aware of the riches that are usually available online at most institutions. What else? Yeah, the main theme. Fight the marginalisation of information literacy education. This current crisis has demonstrated with frightening clarity at times that society at large struggles to distinguish reliable information from the less so. Just to take one pertinent example, that's the reason you're looking at a strange picture of a book in a microwave. I'm not kidding, but staff at a library in Michigan had to send out a message to ask that their books not be put in a microwave, as it was seen by some as a means of destroying the coronavirus. I kid you not. Now, this is an extreme example, but it demonstrates a wider malady, and one which students of politics are far from immune. And, oh yes, assessment. Now this is an area that does need careful thought. I mentioned the open book exams earlier. Well, even in more familiar areas, such as essays, there may need to be some tweaks. So, for example, last semester I was running a third year module that asked students to create a bibliographic account of a political actor. And I was aware that not all the resources that they hoped to use would be available. The libraries were closed very, very swiftly on one particular day in March. I'm sure you all had the same experience. And so I added some extra instructions which I hoped would help mitigate this. So firstly, as you can see, I allowed them to highlight a source that they would have used had they had the chance. But to prevent it just inviting a long list of resources, somebody saying, I don't know, they'd read all the Robert Caro volumes of the Lyndon Johnson biography, I did actually require that the student explain how it would have been used. Also, another tweak, I did make it very explicit that students could and indeed should roam beyond the usual material. Like podcasts, even YouTube videos, newspaper databases, some of the archive stuff that we possess, Thatcher archives. Now, I did quite a few emails back saying, can I really use a TV program in one of my academic essays? And this was usually followed a day or two later with, how do I cite a TV program in one of my academic essays? But by and large, I do think these tweaks helped. The work was of a similar, if not better, standard this year. And I did get some really interesting responses from the students to explain how they would use particular sources had they been there. And these showed excellent information literacy skills. They were rewarded. They also show some of the strategies students were using to find stuff when it wasn't freely available. So this is one of them. Which I thought was quite nice. And even greater detail here. Somebody doing a project on Gwynfor Evans. So yeah, I mean, this actually demonstrates considerable information literacy, and I wouldn't have known this otherwise. And so I was able to award marks for it. So I was pleased about that. I must say, however, it was only a minority who took advantage of this. Right, so that's, I think, enough of me spouting forth for a while. Just one additional thought, possibility, option, the radical option. As much as anything, perhaps just to provoke some kind of responses. I can suggest possibility, but as I mentioned before, since we don't have a level playing field and lost you around to the resources that are available, should we limit students to just what is available on our reading lists? So I say that's probably enough from me. Here's a reading list of course, the bibliography. If I'm doing information literacy, I needed to put one of those on, of course. And I shall try back to you now, all being well. Hey.
Okay, Stephen, thank you. That's a really good overview of a range of topics. We've had a few questions coming through in the chat, and if people have got further questions, please post those to the chat. But can I kick off by going through a few of those? But actually, I'd like to start off with one which wasn't in the chat, but I'd like to ask, in terms of when we talk with librarians, I know that you've done a lot of work with librarians. I'm sure that when we talk with librarians about our courses, as politics academics, we probably think that we're saying things very clearly and setting things out very clearly. But what are the things that we can do to help librarians? How can we communicate better? Are there kind of particular strategies or approaches or things that we don't tell them that it would really be helpful to tell them?
I am absolutely sure there are. And I also know there happen to be a couple of librarians in the room, as it were. So it probably is better to go, rather than the monkey, as it were, to go to the organ grinder. Rebecca Mogg, would you be willing to say? She's in the room.
Hi, yes, I am here. Yes, this is Rebecca.
Thank you.
Talking at the moment, but I think that probably Louisa is better placed to comment on this than me. But
is Louisa there as well? Oh yes, so she is.
She is. Good. She's here. Yes, as a subject librarian, I think she's probably better placed to advise on this. But I think earlier the better is probably the main advice that we offer, so that we've got the opportunity to have the conversation with you. But I'll pass over to Louisa, who's been handling these types of queries all summer, I think.
I second that. Certainly, the earlier the better, just to give us time. I think you, Stephen, covered the process we go through quite clearly. It isn't just a case of checking one website, is this book available, and just buy it. Quite often it's a case of having to check several sites, databases, providers, and in our case, and I think it's a case for most universities, we have been contacting publishers as well to ask for availability of books and so on. And of course, if we need to scan chapters, for example, we need to check copyrights. So there's yet another source that we need to check. So I think the sooner the better, and also be as clear as possible about what you would like. So as many details as possible about the book, and probably what you don't like to hear, but bear in mind that you might need to find alternatives if not very much is available, as in the case of Stephen's reading list, which I butchered. Apologies, it's nothing personal.
Thank you, Stephen. Have you anything to sort of add from your perspective on that at all?
No, I don't think so. I think the important thing is to get the relationship up and running, that dialogue. And I know Cardiff is very fortunate to have subject librarians. I know not every institution does. But if you do have one of those resources, I hope you don't mind it, Louisa, but use them. That's what they are there for. And I get the feeling sometimes we don't make as much of them, the librarians, as they would themselves would like us to use them. Part of the academic world, then I think sometimes they are seen as a service, but that is just so wrong. They are part of us, they are part of academia. Librarians now praise they're no longer the custodians of information, they're teachers of information. And that is such a powerful skill that we need to inculcate to our students. And a lot of librarians don't have that opportunity. So, as I say, get in touch, make contact, have a talk, have a coffee. Well, is that possible? As soon as we can, anyway.
Excellent, thank you, Stephen. I think hopefully we do see librarians as part of the academic teams helping in the delivery of courses. In terms of some of the other questions, there was one of the questions was from Donna fairly early on about what we can do to help academics move away from just a reliance on books. And you talked a little bit about that later in terms of how you were working with students to sort of say, look at YouTube videos or whatever else. Can you talk us a little bit more through that? How did you succeed? How did you make that successful? Because I'd imagine there are a range of pitfalls that you have to kind of scaffold students through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate in that this module is the one I'm thinking about in particular, this third year one, which you saw the assessments before, is expressly an information-focused module. It's been designed very, very much with that in mind. And I have used librarians very much to help shape it in the first place. So that's another key thing. If you are designing a new module, make sure they're there from the start. But it is interesting that many students have a reluctance to go beyond the norm, to go beyond the journal article, to go beyond the traditional textbook. It's sometimes, you can see the relief on people's faces that, yes, I can actually use, say, a YouTube video, or something from the box of broadcasts, which is a fantastic resource. But inevitably, and I mean, this is at the heart of the whole module, and if we're looking at political memoirs, why are they telling me this? Whose truth is this? These are questions that we ask all the time on this particular module. So it's very easy to transpose it from the memoirs to any other form of information. So I'm basically doing, almost unconsciously, an information literacy course, but using political books, in this case, particularly memoirs. So by and large, most of my students get it automatically, because that is what that module is all about. We don't do any direct training. As I mentioned before, I desperately try and avoid that word study skills. It is just the killer. And so it's kind of part and parcel of the normal teaching that's going on. And I think, by and large, that's why it works. Yeah, it'd be interesting to try that out with say, the first year classes. I don't think it would work quite as well, but that's what university is about. It is about learning these skills as they go along. That was a rambly answer. I'm not sure I even really answered it, but hey,
I suppose,
do.
Conversely to that, I just wonder, are there any sort of, in terms of trying to look at the positives rather than just everything being worse off, are there sort of actual benefits in terms of having students, for example, engaging with documentaries on YouTube or other sorts of e-resources that open up possibilities and options for you?
Yeah, yeah. It's too right there are. Yeah, I'm desperate for my students to use these sources, but they've got, the important thing, of course, is use them critically. Why the usual questions? Why is this person telling me they're being broadcast? What's the purpose behind it? I mean, the biggest issue is that perhaps too many students, certainly in those coming into university, are seeing all information as the same. Anything that's printed, perhaps anything that's broadcast, not anything, but in some cases that is the case. It is treated as identical, as equally worthy of putting in their essays and so forth. As I was examining a look at some of the websites that were used, and some were pretty startling. I'm not sure where I started now, but what was the question again? Sorry, John.
It was about what benefits might be in terms of, you know, students using a wide variety of resources. Obviously, there's, you know, low quality resources we don't want to use, but if it does, you know, if there are, for example, good quality documentaries that have been produced in the past, I just sort of wondered, you know, how much that can actually be a benefit in terms of getting students or supporting students in terms of engaging with that wider selection of resources.
Oh, I think it's absolutely, I mean, it is one of the positives that could come out of this, that more will use those kind of resources. And if they're used well, why not? I guess for many students, it might be the kind of the way into a particular topic. And then once they've seen that program, I don't know, on the miners' strike or whatever, then they can go off and read the books, as it were. So it might be, yeah, a gateway into reading the stuff that we academics read. I mean, that is an issue. Going off on a slight tangent, I was thinking about this morning. We assume that, say, journal articles are the gold standard. And I guess they are, but they're not always the most suitable forms of information, certainly for first years. So, I mean, perhaps another advantage of this, now we do have to rethink our reading lists, is to think very, very carefully, what are we putting on here? Is it the most suitable for a particular age group? Or could we do something better? And not yet. But anything that gets people, the students, engaged with as many information sources as possible, I think is a good idea. So long as ever, it's that information is treated critically.
A couple of questions have come up around diversity. Charlotte raised a point about, in terms of benefits, are there potential opportunities here to diversify the reading list, for example, more female authors, more LGBT authors. But equally, I think Santadeepa from India has raised the issue that some of her students have difficulty with English language resources and would prefer things in other languages. But I suppose also just the thought that if the selection of ebooks is significantly smaller than paper books, do we find certain biases in what is being turned into ebooks, and do we find that in actual fact this is a smaller set of readings, perhaps more focused around the American market, for example? I don't know if you've had an experience on terms of any of that.
I'm guessing here, again, it might be wise to get either Louisa or Rebecca involved, who probably know better than I. From what I gather, as I mentioned before, academic sources tend to be relatively well served by ebooks. I don't know if there's particular, well, Louisa, you'll know better than I.
It's hard to tell really whether certainly larger publishers have are more able to make things available electronically, and they also call the shots really, because they know that institutions need ebooks, so they can quite often actually name the price, and it's eventually is their own choice what they make available and what they don't. Smaller publishers, it's more difficult to find ebooks from smaller publishers. In terms of an American bias, I'm not sure there is one. What I can say is that often we have texts that are available electronically, but they're only licensed for the USA, so we can't buy them for the UK. So that is currently a problem we face as well. That the book does exist, but it's not licensed, so it goes back to copyright licensing.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. Donna asked a question about your approach to teaching information literacy, and you touched on it a bit, but you might want to say more on it, about the pros and cons of teaching information literacy skills, if you like, explicitly as information literacy skills, and the as against embedding them in other content. I wondered if, I think you've tried both, and do you want to talk a little bit about which has been more successful in various occasions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's straightforward. I mean, almost all the literature suggests that an embedded approach is almost always better. I mean, clearly, the session in the library, the bolt-on, as literature sometimes calls it, is better than nothing. But anything that breaks down that faculty-library divide makes a huge difference. As I said, made that point quite clearly, I think. If it's badge study skills, you've immediately lost half the room. But if it's seen as part of the academic process, that does make all the difference. So it's a matter of getting, especially from the library, as I say, there from the word go, as engaged in the process as possible. And they don't actually have to be there, but that engagement at some point in the process is, I think, vital to get a proper information literacy education. I guess, Louisa, perhaps again, because you've done an awful lot of teaching for me over the years, for which I'm profoundly grateful. How do you find it?
It's been a pleasure. That's true. It definitely. Librarians can help in many ways. As you said, Stephen, it could be just in the preparation of a particular session. It could be anything, something as small as finding the most appropriate resource to use in the session to demonstrate how to find resources. Something that is likely to work during the session, to deliver a session or part of a session, doing a live demo, for example, for students. Certainly in my experience, having a close collaboration between the faculty and the library has worked a lot better. Obviously, students do see the relevance if we're using examples that are relevant to their subjects rather than just generic examples. And if they see that academics work and value the library input, certainly does help. I think it get much better results, definitely.
Okay, thank you. And we've had some points by Abigail, which I'll throw in. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to answer them. There was a question about licensing YouTube, about if are there any issues with things being on YouTube and us using them, about licensing, and also a question about how if we've got books where you're only limited perhaps to 3 people accessing them online at any one point, any strategies we can use if we've got a class of 60 who we've just asked to go and have a look at it. I suspect both might be a little bit insurmountable at this stage, but I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Stephen.
I no, but Louisa might.
Shall I take
Yes,
this?
Please.
In terms of YouTube, it's I don't have one answer. I mean, we would have to look at each specific example. Generally, for example, at Cardiff University, we have a reader list software that we use. Or even if you're using a VLE, if you add in links, if you point in students to particular resources, usually the copyright restrictions are around copying. So if you do need to use a YouTube video, you better just add the link to the reader list or send the link to the students rather than copying the actual video. That is the first step to bear in mind. Obviously, there's an awful lot of content on YouTube that is not properly licensed. There are a lot of films, for example, that shouldn't be there. So there is an element of judgment there. As I said, we need to look at each sort of example individually. In terms of, so much better, as I think, Stephen, you mentioned, we have a box of broadcasts, which is a database of off-air recordings, and that they fully licensed for use in an academic environment. So it would be better to use something like that if the institution has it, rather than relying on YouTube. Again, if you talk to the library, perhaps they might be able to point out if there is an alternative to the YouTube video. In terms of access, ebook access, again, this is a decision of the publisher. There's a huge variety of models, and the publishers seem to come up with more and more creative ideas every day, every week, really, how to restrict or open up content. So again, it's a case that they, your librarian would need to look at. They would need to look at the specific book. If it's, for example, a 3-user license, which you seem to have indicated there, it could be as simple as buying a further copy of that book. So from 3, you would have a 6 concurrent access. So 6 students at the time could access that book. If the ebook is still available, or just multiple copies of, that would increase the access. Or it could be that the publisher is willing for a certain amount of money to make it an unlimited user access. Again, a conversation to have with the librarian. They'll be able to advise.
Thank you very much. We're just reaching the end of our session. So a big thank you to Stephen and also to Louisa for those inputs, extremely helpful. A couple of other bits of information just to give you before we go. We are now making certificates of participation available if you want that to evidence your CPD in terms of engaging with these sessions. You need to have attended, I believe, 3 sessions or more to receive those, and you should contact your Learn Society. So if you're a member of PSA, contact PSA. If you're a member of BISA, contact BISA. If you're a member of both, contact both if you like and have to. But those are now available. And finally, just to say, the next of our PSA BISA webinars is on Thursday this week, where you'll have an opportunity to ask questions on online teaching from a panel of experts. And then next Tuesday, we've got what makes a good online lecture. So thank you very much for your time and have a good day. Thanks.